KJ Jefferson is no longer driving the Gus bus, but who's going to be at the wheel?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gittins, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of the day. Joining me today is Andrew Gluchov. He's a writer for the Last Word on Sports website. Andrew, thanks for joining me today, man.
Pleasure to be here, Mike.
Let's jump right in here. KJ Jefferson was benched. And you have some information on how that process went down. You're the guy in the room. You've been covering this thing for over 6 years here, Andrew. Gus went to two other quarterbacks on Saturday. Let's talk about KJ and the switch that they made there.
Well, he flat out said in the post game, because he was asked, why make this change? Because it wasn't known until pregame that KJ was out. But EJ Colson, true freshman, and the youngest player in FBS this year to start a football game, I might add, was going to be your starter. And it was a bit of a head scratcher because he was fourth in the depth chart earlier this year. As he said, had a number of really good practices over the last couple weeks, and they wanted to give him a shot. Now, the plan was to have him and second stringer Jacurri Brown, the transfer from Miami, go back and forth, switching off each possession. Well, Coleson looked like a freshman. He did. It was a little too fast for him. He struggled, and his one completion was for a loss to running back Johnny Richardson, who then subsequently fumbled the ball. And I think that rattled him a bit. And he just the timing wasn't there, the accuracy wasn't there, but you saw little flashes of what could be. But this is a true freshman. You expect that. So Jacurri Brown has more experience, was able to come in and was much more comfortable.
Well, Andrew, you and I talked before we started recording about the decision to go with EJ, and they felt very confident and resolute in that decision. They talked about how well he had done at practice, but clearly there was a plan to rotate these two quarterbacks the whole first half, was there not?
Absolutely. In fact, it was really meant to do it beyond that. But, you saw a massive divide in how each player was handling things on the field. Brown looked way more comfortable. The game was much slower to him, and he was just a shiftier runner, moving the ball. He had, the offensive line really betrayed him, and I know that's going to be a hot topic. So as a result, Brown had to run the ball a lot. In fact, at the end of the first half, he was the leading rusher in the team. He was running for his life, and he made it work. Coleson just not quite there, but you know what? I think this is a great opportunity, especially with the red shirt rules where you can play the 4 games anytime in the season. Even though this is game 6, it doesn't count against eligibility. I think this was great exposure for him. The defense did an outstanding job keeping them in the game. But when push came to shove, Jacurri Brown rose to the occasion as the best quarterback on this team.
Let's stick with Jacurri Brown here because he took over full-time after the half. He came out and he finished the game. He finished 13 for 21 for 207 yards and a touchdown. No interceptions. Great the performance by Jacurri Brown in his first start.
Yeah, and you know what? This is with minimal prep. So you saw a few throws that were a little bit off. Players had to slow down a bit. Maybe it was a little behind them. A little bit of timing chemistry there. But you know what? That's what practice is for. And now you put him as the guy going forward. I think that'll actually lead to better results as the season wears on.
Now, Andrew, you talked about Jacurri Brown using his legs a lot in the first half of that game. I think he finished the first half as leading rusher for UCF. Was that by design or, is it a product of him just kind of running for his life there?
It's a bit of both. This is a run first, run second team. You have RJ Harvey, one of the best running backs in the Big 12. And then you have quite a stable behind him. You have Miles Montgomery, the transfer from Cincinnati, who was able to play a little bit against his former team, and I'm sure he enjoyed that. You have Penny Boone, the transfer from Toledo, as the reigning MAC Offensive Player of the Year, and then holdover Johnny Richardson, the undersized speedback. And you have a 4 horseman group right there. You throw in originally KJ Jefferson, who became like a 5th running back. And that's why they ran the ball so much. Well, Jefferson out, Brown in, they're still running the ball a lot. I mean, you're not going to change that dynamic of this team overnight, but Brown raised to the occasion. He stepped up and was leading the team in rushing at halftime, ended up with 84 yards on 16 carries. I mean, that's a lot of running. And as you know, college, unlike the pros, college nets your numbers against your sacks.
Yeah, it does. I hate that. I
absolutely hate that, because the truth is, if you break it down, he had gains of 112 and losses of 28, hence the 84 yards net. So if you played it right, and with stat wise, I wish college football would change this. He would have been a 100-yard rusher. He was busy, and I was really impressed with his decision making. He didn't run straight into a tackle. He was shifty. He made some smart reads, and because the offensive line has betrayed this team so badly that even RJ Harvey, one of the best running backs in the Big 12, can't run the ball anymore. You're going to have to either, one, run outside, which Brown did an excellent job, or you're going to have to throw the ball more. And he also did a good job there. It's going to take a little bit of time to build that chemistry with the receivers and start anticipating their moves a little bit. But, I mean, if you're a UCF fan, you have to be impressed with how Jacurri Brown did. This is a redshirt sophomore. He's got more eligibility left.
Now, you talked about chemistry with the wide receivers. He found Kobe Hudson 7 times for 114 yards and a TD on Saturday. How excited should UCF fans be about the connection that he's already found with Kobe Hudson, who has turned into a really good Big 12 receiver?
Kobe Hudson is a fantastic receiver. He was kind of the default guy expected to rise up after Javon Baker went into the NFL draft. And he certainly is playing the role now. Passing numbers are down. Not there, not the receiver's fault. But one of the things I really enjoyed is that Kobe Hudson was one of the players that was brought in post-game for interviews. And he was pretty fiery, very honest. And he flat out said, hey, look, I made mistakes too. There were, he mentioned a couple of routes that he could have done better. And they didn't get the result that he wanted. He was able to kind of, take that hit himself, as well as when he was asked about how he helped even freshman EJ Colson, go out there. He was, look, I believe in him. I got his back. And I told him, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw up. No one's perfect. This is football. But you can't, don't let it get you down. Don't hang your head. That's the kind of guy you want as a leader in the locker room. And, this is a team that's lost 3 straight. He was a member of the team last year that lost 5 straight when they first joined the Big 12. So he knows how deep this can go, but he also knows how to get out of that hole. And that's the kind of leadership you want in the locker room. I was really impressed with how honest Kobe Hudson was talking to the media about, these negative aspects. I know a lot of players and coaches are afraid to talk about negative things internally, and he wasn't afraid to. And I thought that was really refreshing. That's a guy I want to stand behind.
Well, yes, he had a great day on Saturday to get the ball to the receivers. Obviously, you need time to throw the ball, which Jacurri Brown didn't have a lot of on Saturday. We're going to talk about O-line play in our next segment after this word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Gametime is the best place to buy tickets. When you download the Gametime app, you'll get all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout. Panoramic seat views before you buy, and the lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Gametime app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? Gametime. Coming back here with my guy, Andrew Gluchov from The Last Word on Sports. Andrew, quite frankly, the quarterbacks were running for their lives on Saturday. It was awful. Looking at the advanced statistics, PFF cites that these guys were under pressure over 39% of their dropbacks on Saturday. You and I, before we start recording, we talked about the O-line. Man, what do they got to do to fix the O-line here?
Try again next season. This is not a good offensive line. In fact, they did start making some changes. They had a change at center. Marcellus Marshall moved over from guard to center. Actually did a decent job. First time at a new position. So they are starting to try to make some changes. But this offensive line is it's rough. They lack usable depth that's ready to go out there and play. You have a lot of technical problems. Paul Rubel, one of the offensive tackles, is 6'9", 6'10". He's too tall, and as a result, that center of gravity way too high. That hurts in the run block because you can't get that low explosiveness. And this is just a recurring problem. The different position groups. It started against Colorado. They crashed the line, dared you to throw the ball, and it worked. It worked spectacularly. Then Florida did it. It worked. Cincinnati did it. It worked. So now everyone has a formula. Okay, RJ Harvey is really dangerous. How do we neutralize him? Crash the line. Make these guys have to, do their job as run blockers, and they lack the explosiveness to do so. They lacked the explosiveness last year, but they weren't being overloaded like they are now. And this has been a progressively worsening offensive line each year over the last 4 or 5 seasons. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And now you have this offensive line that has very little run block power. They did well against, New Hampshire and Sam Houston. We're not talking, Big 12 quality teams there. And then TCU is not a great Big 12 team. And so they were able to hold their own there, but it took an entire half to kind of figure out what do we need to change to do something. Now they're starting to play better teams, and they're, they haven't even hit the meat of the schedule. Iowa State, BYU, Arizona, Utah, they're all still on the schedule. At 3-3, they may not make a bowl game at this point.
Yeah, they gave up 4 sacks on Saturday, which again is troubling. Could have been more from where I was sitting, if not for the escapability of Jacurri Brown. It's how do you see the run pass balance here, Andrew? If the O-line can't get it together, can Gus run his offense with this sort of O-line play?
Not well. I think Brown with a little more time and seasoning can kind of rise up in this situation and do some damage and be able to mitigate the lack of the running game's consistency. But running for your life, it's a crapshoot. It's only a matter of time before something happens, guy gets hurt or something. You gotta protect your quarterback. You gotta create the pocket. As there's obviously a big difference between run block and pass block, between the strength and explosiveness and the low center of gravity in the run block versus the lateral agility required in the pass block. And neither are really there all that much. Those pockets broke down fast. In fact, last play of the game was a quarterback sack because the pass defense just crashed, and the line could not buy enough time for a 25-yard pass.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough watching a young quarterback under those conditions, come in. Now, I think he acquitted himself pretty well. Again, when you look at the numbers, obviously you want him to be a little better in that completion percentage in today's college football. Anything in the mid to high 60s obviously will have you doing really well. Look, they went into that fourth quarter with a chance against Cincinnati. Now, what kind of chance are they going to have against Iowa State? I'm not so sure, but we're going to talk about it right after a word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This weekend, UCF is looking like a 13.5-point dog to Iowa State. And they're 0-2 versus the spread, coming off losses so far this season. So whether you think they'll beat the spread or not, go check out our friends at FanDuel, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Look, Iowa State is surprisingly good, depending on who you ask this year. What does UCF have to do? What does Gus have to do to get this thing on the right track going into Saturday to have a chance there against Iowa State?
Well, Cincinnati had the second best offense in the Big 12 going into the game this past Saturday, and UCF held them in check. It was a bend, don't break mentality. That was the best pass rush I've seen out of the Knights all season. Their pass rush has been absolutely abysmal all year. They had 2 sacks. They had some pressures. Brendan Sorsby got hit a number of times hard, throwing the ball. And, they actually looked a lot like, I was impressed. It was the best performance that they had all year. Well, they need to bring that intensity next week, not let this close one get them down. They held Cincinnati in check under 3 touchdowns. It was a winnable game. It was, it came down to that last play. If they can keep Iowa State within 21 points total on offense, they got a real shot at this. But, Rocco Becht is just having a fantastic
He's
game.
Doing great. He's doing great so far.
Over 1,400 yards in the air. I mean, this is a pass team. They're not quite as potent as Cincinnati, but this is a more complete team than Cincinnati. They got 3 running backs that can all run the ball really well. And so you got that dual, balance going on. And I UCF's gonna struggle a little bit if they focus on one versus the other. But the truth is, they're gonna have to play their best defensive game all year.
I was gonna ask, how do you see them getting to Rocco? Because he's only been sacked 4 times this year so far, and he's not turning the ball over a ton. Again, 10 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. From what I'm looking at, the way you close the gap here, I think, with Iowa State is by creating turnovers, getting him out of the pocket, and making him uncomfortable on defense. Do you see UCF being able to accomplish that on Saturday?
Well, they're going to have to improve greatly on their angles of attack. Their angles have been absolutely atrocious, and it allowed Cincinnati to stay on the field a lot longer. I mean, you cannot win the game when you're giving up 9 of 16 on 3rd down, and you're not giving up a lot of points, but you're on the field too long. You're tiring out. They had over 33 minutes of time of possession the Bearcats did. So you got to find ways to close out. You got to find ways to get off the field, and you got to improve the angle of attack so that when that player does a little wheel route out of the backfield, you're not caught completely flat-footed, or hey, outside defensive end. Your job is containment. Don't let that guy pass you and you're chasing him to the outside. No. Make him cut inside where the linebackers are waiting for him to make a play. So I think if they can make a couple of small adjustments, they could keep Iowa State in, within a reasonable striking distance. If the offense can't deliver, that's a different story. But at least the defense needs to do their job.
Yeah, I think, again, getting him off balance early is going to be really important for UCF defensively to have a chance in this one. The ESPN FBI predictor is not giving these guys much of a chance here against Iowa State. So 78% to 21 here. And with all the problems that Gus is having with his team right now, kind of breaking down at the wrong time, I want to close out talking about, is this a must win? You started the year, on a little bit of a streak. Now you're on a 3-game slide, 4 straight, man. Like, what does this do to your season if you're UCF?
Well, I want to pour a little salt on the wound. Iowa State is currently a 13.5-point favorite on Odd Shark. So, I mean, Vegas is supporting the fact that that ESPN's calculators are saying this doesn't look good.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the truth. The fans already have the pitchforks being sharpened and the torches being lit. They're calling for his job. In the world of NIL, the fact that KJ Jefferson was an expensive guy to bring in, they are beyond furious over how bad he's been. He's been out of shape. I mean, looks like he's overweight and just, looks always out of breath and just very lackadaisical. And it's like, we spent all this money on this guy. You convinced us to bring in this guy. Well, Gus has to answer that at the end of the day. But the truth is, UCF can't afford to fire him yet. So
yeah,
I think no matter what, he'll be safe this season. But depending on where they finish, is going to be how hot that seat is next year.
Yeah, I think he's still collecting a paycheck from Auburn, honestly. So Gus,
he's been collecting for a while.
Yeah, looking for double paychecks here. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me today. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find your work.
You can catch me on Twitter at StatBoyDrew, and Last Word on College Football, part of the Last Word on Sports, family, covering UCF. We got previews, we got reactions, and maybe some other stuff here and there. But having a great time doing it, and thanks for having me, Mike.
Guys, thank you for making Locked On UCF your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Big 12 podcast. Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and holds no punches when it comes to covering every team in the Big 12. Find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube wherever you listen to podcasts. Guys, we're out. We'll see you tomorrow with more Locked On UCF.